Now they are calling for death to America. And more I hear people saying we need to make America to become a socialistic country. And that's when I said, no more. No.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lacy Johnson Podcast. The young lady that you just saw is my guest this evening. I'm very excited to talk to her, Miss Jinny Choi. We're going to be talking about her experience in her growing up in South Korea, coming to America. We're going to be talking about capitalism versus socialism. We're going to dive a little bit into affirmative action and the general hodgepodge of subjects here. And I have mentioned before that I always like talking to people from other countries because they give us a different perspective. I've indicated before, one of my big problems with the corporate news media is that they hardly ever give historical or global context to what's going on. And to be honest, it's been my experience, there's a reason they do that. And it's not a good one. It has to do with propaganda and a lot of other subjects that I'm not going to get into right now. But to have someone from South Korea give them a perspective, I think it's always great. We've talked about some business associates of mine from Kenya, from Ethiopia, and other places, Mexico, a lot of just all around the world. So we're looking forward to hearing that. First of all, before we go there, you know, I have often told the story that I was born during the Korean War. And, you know, I like to halfway know what I'm talking about most of the time. So I decided to prep for this show to go back and refresh my memories here on the Korean War. And the first thing that jumped out at me was the war was fought from between 1950 and 1953. I was actually born in 1954, so I'm going to have to correct that. I will still say I was named after a Korean soldier who was killed in Korea, so that's still true, but I wasn't born during it. I was born right after it, so I didn't want to straighten that out. I'm glad to learn that. Now, locally here in Minneapolis, nice weather here. A couple of things that's going on that's happened recently. Those of you who are sports fans, our Minnesota Timberwolves, they are up on the defending NBA champions, Denver Nuggets, and they're looking pretty good, people. We got a lot of people beginning to think they can win it all. I'm one of those people who think they can win it all, and we are very blessed to have Anthony Edwards and all the Timberwolves. Carl Anthony Towns. I shouldn't even get into Rudy Gobert, but basically, Anthony Edwards looks like he's going to be just a superstar, good kid, nice smile, nice personality, tenacity. So that's one of the things that's going on in the Twin Cities. But another thing that happened is over the weekend, I had a chance to meet Mr. Clarence Henderson, and it was such a privilege of mine. There's Mr. Henderson is the one far down on the right there. Yeah, that's him right there. He's sitting at a lunch counter in Woolworth in Greensboro, North Carolina. And him and a bunch of college students at North Carolina A&T, and I forgot the exact year, but those of us who lived through the civil rights era, we know that there was a lot of courageous people out there. And most of them you won't hear about, because generally history is written about the famous people, but it's really created by everyday people just doing things. And leaders can't lead if they don't have anyone to lead. But anyway, I don't want to get too much in that. But bottom line is that I actually walked past that Woolworth, spent some time in Greensboro last year, and I told him the next time I'm in Greensboro, it's a museum now. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to have him in mind. The interesting thing about it, he came up to Minneapolis to speak for the African American Family Preservation Act on behalf of the Frederick Douglass Foundation of Minnesota. And I'm proud to be one of the founders of that. And so we had a great time. great diverse audience, great questions and things from the audience and the community. So just meeting him was just special. We go out to dinner to a soul food buffet afterwards, and just the camaraderie, about 12 of us, and it was just a really great time. One of the things that struck me, though, and there's a lot to it, and I'm gonna bring Jinny on here soon, is that he was telling me, Mr. Henderson, I mean, he was in the trenches. He could have got killed. It took a lot of courage to do what he did. It took a lot of faith to do what he did. But where I'm getting to, and I've talked about this before too, I mean, our community and our culture used to be just total respect for our elders. And I just see that's breaking down. I think a lot of it has to do with the breakdown of the family. A lot of it has to do with our public school indoctrination. And I know a lot of people think it's education, but if you really understand what's going on, there's a lot of indoctrination. And as I mentioned here before, the current, what's the name? Xi Jinping or whatever his name is. But the current president of China, when he decided that he wanted to take the country in a different direction than Mao Zedong, and Mao, there's a lot of peasant farmers and things. He wanted to modernize China and bring it into the modern age and technology and bring more capitalistic type principle. Long story short, first thing he did was take over the education system. And a lot of that's people who understand how things work, how propaganda works, and how you change countries and things like that. We have a lot of people now infiltrating our education system with all kinds of bad ideas and things like that. And my main pet peeve with it is that they don't educate inner city kids, specifically black kids. And until you start educating our black kids in reading, writing, and arithmetic, I don't want to hear about any other ideas you have. And that's just me. But anyway, I'm not going to get on a soapbox. I better stop there. But there were people calling Mr. Henderson all kinds of names simply because he's a conservative and he votes Republican. And I'm not going to get into that now, but if I just believe that people who really knows what's going on, if you really know what's going on, that's probably the way you're going to go. But unfortunately, our media and, like I say, our education system do a very good job of fooling people about what's really going on. So that's why it's good to talk to people from the other parts of the world who have a different perspective. And that's why I'm so satisfied to have as my guest today, Miss Jinny Choi. So, Jinny, welcome to the Lacy Johnson Podcast. Good to have you as a guest here.
Thank you very much for having me today, Lacy.
Yeah. Hey, nice smile, by the way.
Thank you. You too as well.
All right. I'm ready to delve into your background and how you got where you are. And I read some very interesting things about you. I also heard you speak a couple of times, and I haven't memorized your bio by heart. So to save myself some mistakes here, I do know that you're originally from South Korea, educated there. You came over here to go to college. Why don't you just take a minute or two to give our audience a background information on Ms. Jinny Choi?
Sure. I was born and raised in South Korea. I came here in high school as an international student. I went to women's only private school in dormitory, Sonia Burnham School in Greenfield, Massachusetts. And then I went to Smith College with the economics major, again, all girls school. You can probably see why, my parents. After that, my father. And after that, I went back to Asia. I worked at credit rating company for about 2 years. And then I jumped onto Morgan Stanley as an investment banking analyst. So I worked there for about a couple of more years. And then I came back to the United States. I worked at, actually, I was supposed to start working at a World Trade Center, but 9/11 happened. Long story short, I found another job. So I worked at General Electric for a few years. I did an asset management business. I also was a Six Sigma black belt from General Electric, but I missed, I guess, not sleeping. So that I joined UBS investment banking. So I again didn't sleep. So I worked 24 hours and many years there. And then, as you know, global financial crisis happened. So a lot of us were laid off, myself as well. But I joined, I was laid off for about a couple of months, but I found a job with Bridgewater Associates, which is the largest hedge fund up to still this point. I worked there for about 8 years. I worked for Office of the CEO, working directly for the CEOs for several years there. And I decided to join TPG, which is a private equity in San Francisco. So I moved out to San Francisco. I was hired as a COO for one of their business unit. We decided to actually spin off that business. So I spun off the business. I was the first spin-off ever from TPG, and now we're an independent company. From there, I also started asset management business with my two CEOs with the existing company in Korea, asset management in Korea. That's been going well, but I guess I started seeing what's happening around the world, and I just couldn't keep my mouth shut anymore. So here I am speaking up, and I started making a couple speeches about socialism, especially given the fact I'm from South Korea. South Korea, North Korea is a perfect example of what happened to socialism versus capitalism. And I started making a few speeches, and here I am with you today.
All right, I like that. So a couple of things here. First of all, for our audience, just quick, this Korean War was North versus South. I think it was after World War II. It was divided up along the 38th parallel.
That's
and
correct.
those of you who remember geography know longitude is vertical and latitude is horizontal. The 38th parallel separated the two countries. And then I'm just paraphrasing here. You guys are going to have to go out and read the details. The leader of North Korea decided he was going to unite the country, invaded South Korea. And then Russia and China jumped in, was helping North Korea. And then because of the Cold War, the United States said, we can't let this happen. And we got involved in South Korea. And eventually they had a peace treaty where they decided that they're going to divide the two nations along the 38th parallel. And that's where we are today. But now the details is going to be important too. And South Korea went capitalistic. North Korea went socialistic. Socialism. I would say communism, but I listened to your speech, by the way. So it went socialism. And Lenny is here to share her thoughts and experience and the differences between the two and tell us how crazy we are. And that's my word. To be even thinking about going to socialism. Now, before we get you started on that, though, I did hear Smith College in there.
That is correct. That's where I went.
I think Smith College got a heck of a reputation for, well, I'm a Southern country boy, so we call it hot cotton. You're in hot cotton when you're at Smith College. How was that whole experience? By the way, don't they have another male college that's kind of like that go with them?
I think not for Smith College. So as you can imagine, like Harvard, they didn't allow women. So therefore, their Radcliffe was there, somewhat of the sister school of the Harvard. For Columbia, Barnard was women's college for that. Smith College didn't have that per se, but because Amherst College is right next to us, so that's kind of considered our partner school per se that way.
Okay. Well, good to hear that. Now, what did you major in at Smith College, by the way?
I majored in economics.
Ooh. I'm going to share a little story here. In my college years, I dropped out of 2 classes, and economics was one of them. And the other one, believe it or not, was King James Bible as literature. And to be honest with you, I was always good in math, and I kind of underestimated economics because I'm like, hey, one formula. How tough can this be? Until I got to have to do a balance sheet. The balance sheet was the thing that got me. But anyway, I also need to hear about that. You majored in economics. By the way, what made you decide to major in economics?
Honestly speaking, I really thought I wanted to become a lawyer. I probably watched a few movies, and I thought being a lawyer and being a trial lawyer sound fascinating to me. So that's what I wanted to do. Having said that, I realized I hate writing. Reading papers and just writing papers was not something that I really liked. And I think it's because I kind of I liked economics because it was a logic. It's based on what happens, what then happens, what. It's just kind of like equation, but it's a kind of a long equation. So if you keep thinking about what happens in economics, yes, you can memorize it. But if you step back and there is a logic behind what happens, one happens and the consequences of that is the other and so forth. So I like that part of it a lot. And just writing papers was too daunting for me. So that's one of the reasons I chose economics. And I kind of found something very similar to my upbringing. My father was an entrepreneur. So something that he kind of talked to me a lot about economics of the country, as well as the global economy, and as well as what he does, what he kind of business is about, and so forth. I kind of grew up with it. So economic was something that our business side of it was something that I was attracted to. One funny story is, you know, you're in your high school or junior high school, you kind of not focusing on school work and you read some other magazines or books and so forth. And I got caught by a teacher one day, and a teacher thought I was probably reading a romance or something, kind of a book. And it was actually a business book. And he literally asked me, "This is what you're reading?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Why?" And I said, "I don't know. I like it." So I guess from when I was young, I was attracted to business side of the business. I just didn't know about it.
So this is gonna get dangerous for me, audience. I'm just letting y'all know, right? Somebody might have to bail me out there. So there are various schools of economics.
Correct.
The Keynesian School of Economics, I think it is, that really rely on a lot of government intervention. I think it is. There's the University of Chicago School of Economics, Milton Friedman, and I think Thomas Sowell, and a lot of those people are followers. Is there a particular school? Well, based on what I know about you and heard you say, I'm assuming you're not Keynesian. But is there a particular? I'm assuming you're not Keynesian. Is there a particular school of economics that you tend to be a follower of versus the other one? And like I say, I'm on thin ice here, but I do know that much about the field of economics.
I can't say I know economics at that level for me to say one or another, but Tom Sowell is definitely someone that I look up to. I think he speaks the truth, and without trying to put any agenda or ideology into it, he really is about data and what the data shows and what the facts are and the long-term history of the economics. Not only because when you're looking at economics has been around in one way or another for thousands of years. So you have to look at a very long term. And I think that's one thing I really respect him for. And that's type of economics I prefer. And I believe that more regulations and more regulations and rules that you put it in, you're actually suffocating the economy in a way that it's not healthy for anyone in a long term, as short term as well.
Well, that says to me that when you start looking at the economy, you can connect the dots between causes and effects, because a lot of people don't understand all these government regulations and how it's bad for business and everything. And when they see, well, we know that if you get someone in office who reduce regulations, that it's going to be good for the economy.
Yes,
the economy is going to grow. And if we get someone in office who's in their regulations, it's going to be bad for the economy, going to go down.
Exactly. Look at what's happening right now.
But once again, our media, if you don't know that, they'll convince you of other explanations for what's happening.
I know. That's one of the reasons I really wish young people will study a little bit more. Even just, all the information they want to have is on tip of their fingers. They can just Google it and just to learn. As you could talk about current economics, yes, everybody talks about inflation. Inflation didn't just start out of nowhere. It started because of the policies that was in place that just keep giving the money to people indirectly to the consumer's pocket, which is the worst way of actually stimulating the economy. And you did that for years, actually. After multiple times, everybody says, stop, this is not great. And guess what happened? This is what is the consequences. We're living through it. That's one of the reasons I like economics, because there's cause and effect and the consequences, and everything just piles up. No policy that gets put into place, you can just ignore it, because there's a consequences come in 1 year later, 3 years later, 5 years later, and 10 years later.
Well, one of my pet peeves with the public school system is that they don't teach us economics. And
No,
yeah, and they don't teach us personal anything about finances.
I
And
know, which is really bad.
yeah, but I figured someone figured if we knew about finances, we'd be smarter voters. And a
Maybe
lot
that
of
is
people
why.
don't want us to be smarter voters. They like that fifth grade education type level of education.
Yes,
Uh, yeah, and it's kind of sad. So one other question: you came to America as an international student, is that
that is
right?
correct.
And
International
so I
student
was,
is in high
yeah,
school, 10th
in
grade.
high school. And did you? So if you come to America as an international student in high school, do you go back home during the summer and come
Yeah,
back
I did
again? How
go
does that
back.
whole? Okay, how
So
does
you
that?
can actually
Mhm.
stay in United States if you have a friends or family, whatever. That's totally doable. But if you don't have a place to go for 3 months, yeah, you go back home. In my case, actually, my parents were like, because in Korea we do not have 3 months of vacation. That's just
Okay,
not
right.
possible. So
Mhm.
therefore, my parents decided that like 3 months off from school, that's unacceptable. You were gonna go to summer school. So my my parents enrolled me into a summer school every summer because they could not fathom the idea of 3 months of not studying. So that's what I did.
Now, was the summer school here in America, or was it back in South
Yeah,
Korea? Oh,
there's
okay, okay.
actually a lot of summer schools that is offered in America. Actually, a lot of private schools do offer that. Dormitory schools that definitely offer that. And it's a great actually way of for international students like me to stay 3 months here and then you know study some more and takes different college different courses and so forth.
And did you indicate that this international school was located in Massachusetts, Amherst?
Yes, and I went to Stony Burnham School, which is located in Greenfield, Massachusetts. Greenfield, Massachusetts, it definitely fit my dad's requirement. It was out of nowhere. I think the most place we could go to, Friendly's, CVS, was definitely basically it for us to place to go. And it was only girls' school. We had about 170 students, and we had 120 horses or so forth. So we were big equestrian girls' school. So that's where I was for 3 years.
Well, I've never had any daughters, but if I did, I'd probably be just like your dad. Girls'
Yes,
school.
that's exactly right. And honestly speaking, everybody says like, "Oh my God, did you hate it?" I loved it. I coming to America, I didn't speak a lot of English at all. So English was very difficult when I first came because there's no other Korean students. So I had to learn as I was studying. My favorite subject still was math because math you don't have to speak a lot of English, but you can just solve the equation. And honestly speaking, sophomore level of math in United States was probably about fifth grade math in Korea. So I was able to ace it so quickly. So that was my favorite subject. But I loved how American education system was, especially the school I went to, because in Korea we have about 60 students in one class in my time, and you're wearing a school uniform and you're not allowed to ask any questions. That's just not possible. You just kind of write the notes as teachers teach you, and if teacher offered to students to ask a question, then you raise your hand very politely and ask for your turn to speak and then ask questions politely. And that's how I was brought up. And then all of a sudden I came to United States. It was a private school, but still we didn't have a uniform. And a lot of schools, classes are only like 12 students, maybe 15, sometimes even 7, 8 students. And students sat very comfortably, leaning back to their chair and put their feet up. And I was like, oh my God, if I did that in Korea, like my teachers will beat me up. And my parents would have praised teachers for doing that for my rude behavior. Yet, and there was such a freedom in class, and everybody was allowed to ask questions. And teachers did not get upset when people were asking questions. They welcomed the questions and they talked about it. And I felt like, oh my God, this is the word I was missing out. And I loved how everything was. And I think because of that, I excelled very well in high school, despite the fact English was my second language. I became actually when I was graduating, I had a highest GPA of my class. So I loved it.
Oh, wow. So now you mentioned your latest job, I think, is with the company based in San Francisco.
That is
Uh,
correct.
would I be correct to assume that that's where you are living now? It's in San
No.
Francisco? Okay.
Right now I'm in Orono, Minnesota. So we
Oh,
moved out to
okay.
Minnesota about 3 years ago. 3 years and 1 month, I believe. My
Okay.
husband took a job out here. He's a chief investment officer, so one of the multifamily office out here. So my husband are both in finance. So
Okay,
my
yeah.
husband took a job. So we moved out to Minnesota. So I work from home.
Okay. I said that to let my audience in because we do chat before we come on live here. I saw her lay out there, and I'm like, I had dreams of a man cave looking like that. So just want to let
Yeah,
our
my husband
audience.
really tried to turn in this place to a man cave, and we basically agreed since we moved out here for his job, this is my space for my office. But back of there is definitely some PlayStation as well as some wine refrigerator. So make both
Okay,
of us
so
happy.
we're going to dive into the whole issue of capitalism versus socialism. But before I go there, I did hear in one of your speeches, I'm familiar with the recent Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action that it discriminated against Asian students. I heard you speak on it. And for our audience out there, I've been rather upfront too. I think it's time to end. It was time to end affirmative action. And to be honest with you, and this is why I get in trouble with a lot of my family and stuff. I never thought we needed it. But see, I want to beat them at with their own rules and their own games. I get a thrill out of that. I don't want bars lowered for nothing. I always think we should never talk about lowering standards or anything for any reason. I think it's bad for whoever the standards are being lowered for. And I just think that we should be a country that's based on merit, character, and things like that. And I've been upfront about it. And I get in trouble too. I'm not getting into this game of race and racism and stuff like that, because I think we should look at each individual as an individual. I don't want anyone looking at me as part of a group and judging me based on my skin color, and I don't think I should do that to anybody else. So that's the high level. So the Asian community is really known for being high achievers in academics. They're known for being, valuing education. And actually, I think you being in economics, you do know that their average wages or annual income, however you divide it up, is higher than the white Americans.
That's
And
correct.
so, and I tell everybody too that how do you explain that?
Exactly.
If there's racism, how do you explain that? The other thing I point out too is that, and this is one reason I get in trouble too. Look, we don't need affirmative action for our athletes. Why should we need affirmative action for our academic people? I think we should be academics should be just as valued as athletics. And if we ever do that, I think we don't need academic affirmative action. And the other thing I got to say on that area, I really appreciate the fact that when I was going to school, and by the way, I went to school in Mississippi, and everybody thinking this is a backwards country, and I let them think that, and we are uneducated and all that stuff. But with the school I went to, the scholars was more popular than the athletes, and I'm glad of that. But we had some heck of a scholars, man. So anyway, what was your thought on the recent Supreme Court affirmative action ruling where they said it was discriminating against Asian? And just give us some Joan. And I'm saying that to prime the pump to get you on that subject. What do you think of it, that ruling?
I welcome the decision, obviously, because as you said, Lacy, I do not believe we need to lower this criteria for anyone or up the criteria for anyone, because when it's merit-based, that is actually most fair and equitable standardization for everyone to get up ahead. Having said that, one of the things I welcome when they're selecting students or choosing an employee at the corporation perspective, rather than just looking at one dimension of the students, just looking at the SAT score or looking at the grades, looking at the overall of the students, I think that's a great idea to understand where the student is coming from, what kind of obstacles they were able to overcome, and then kind of giving the holistic view I
Right.
completely agree with that.
Right.
Having said that, because they're trying to artificially creating this equity, they call it, for the name of equity, they're discriminating one person based versus the other based on very subjective view of whoever is assessing these students. It is a very dangerous way to go. And most of all, I don't know if you know Glenn Lowry, but I
Oh yeah,
really
oh yeah. I know
respect
Glenn
what
Lowry.
he says about the affirmative action. And it is, I completely believe what he said about the affirmative action. It is patronizing certain group of people, and it's lowering the dignity of the people, and it's reducing people's self-worth, not elevating it. I could not agree with him more on that. Because when I am choosing someone because of their race or gender or any of those things to fill the quota, you are actually patronizing that person. You're reducing that person's worth. You're basically giving a pity score, which I personally think that's more racist thing than any other thing that you can do. When it's based on merit, nobody can judge you based on your race or gender. If you work harder, you can get better. And that's American dream. That's what America offers. And look at Asians. We are so much late coming into United States than any other race. We came here later than Italians, Irish people, and obviously Black people and so forth. Yet we have the highest earning capacity in the United States. Why is that? And if the racism is truly existing in the United States, and that's what is prohibiting from certain group of the people to advance, then Asians of the population is going to debunk that theory. And I think you need to look into why. And yes, there's definitely culture of education is being the most important in a lot of Asian families and Asian, like Korea. We are the 13th largest of economy, yet a lot of families spend more than 50% of their income toward the kids' education. That's how important that is. They will spend more money on their kids' education than mortgage. So yes, that is the high competitiveness of Asian communities coming into the United States and just wanting to best for the education. And I think that's the focus we should have put on kids. I bet my life that no kids from Black or white or Hispanic, they are not different when they are born. It's just how they are raised and what's emphasized in their lives throughout. And I think lowering the standard for a certain group of the people actually is discriminating them against anybody else.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Glenn Lowry, and for our audience out there, Glenn Lowry, I think he was born and raised in inner city Chicago, tough neighborhood.
Yes.
He went on and received his PhD, I think, in economics. I
Yes,
think
he did.
he's
He's an
also
economic.
he's also a proponent of the Chicago School of Economics, along with Thomas Sowell. So he's a professor at Brown University,
Yeah.
one of the Ivy League schools, and Brown is one of the most liberal schools out there. He's a conservative, but then he has a lot of respect. So I encourage our audience to check out Glenn Lowry, Thomas Sowell, and Milton Friedman, and just get what I think is a very good perspective on economics and the role of government and what it should play and all the bad things government can do to our economy. So I encourage our audience to go out there and do that. The other thing you talked about, and I'm a believer in this, I mean, there's a way, well, let me back up. I really believe that you don't always judge people by where they are, but how far they've come.
Yes.
And I think if the colleges could figure out a way to say this person had to overcome a lot more because of this, and not just the color of the skin. It has to do with economics and other things, families and things like that. Take that into consideration rather than the color of a person's skin. I think I'd be more than supportive of that because we do want to support people who had a lot more difficult obstacles to overcome than those born with a silver spoon in their mouth. So I agree with that 100%. And I just want to clear up with our audience because a lot of times people don't understand this. I don't want lowering the bar, special favors, or anything because I believe we don't need it.
Thank you.
We don't need it.
No, we don't need it.
Right. And, I'm just a competitor anyway. I'm just like, let's just go out and kick their butts in the classroom just like we do in athletics, and we won't have this issue. Okay. So that's an excellent point on affirmative action. We'll see how that goes. I think it's basically over and done with as far as racial-based ones. And I think we're finally moving towards what we were, judging people on the content of their characters. We know that given the current environment, the current divide, that's half the country want to roll that back, and they still want to focus on the isms, your gender, your race, your sexual preferences. People, let's judge people as individuals. I played a video clip from Morgan Freeman during Black History Month, and he's not in favor of Black History Month, and I wasn't either, and he explained why. But one of the things he said about racism is that we should just stop talking about it, and I wouldn't have an issue with that. I think we should talk about cultures and culturalism and obstacles and things like that. But this whole race notion, which is not scientifically based anyway, I'm for getting rid of that. So let's dive into South Korea now. First of all, how many sisters and brothers do you have, Jinny?
I have one younger brother who is 5 years younger than me.
Okay, so you're the oldest. That's what I want to know.
I am the oldest child.
Yeah. And Dad, are you daddy's girl? And was he very protective and stuff like that?
Yes. My dad passed away. Having said that, though, my dad had a view of what he wanted his daughter to be. And he wanted his daughter to be this obedient, nice young lady who would play music and who would host a family, who would focus on raising family, not working and supporting husbands. That sort of a role as my dad really wanted me to become. Unfortunately, I was born with this loud mouth and I had an opinion on everything, and I was not shying away from expressing my opinion. So that became a bit of an issue when I was a teenager. So my dad and I pretty much clashed a lot. But at the end of the day, I think it's because my personality is very much like my dad. And so I just happened to have his personality, and I think he acknowledged it. I acknowledged it later too. And he became my best supporter, and he was so proud of me for going to Smith College and graduating college and working in Morgan Stanley and so forth. And that's when he passed away with pancreatic cancer. But my younger brother also came to the United States, just like me. He went to junior high school here, Eaglebrook and high school, and he went to Cornell, and now he's back in Korea working. But he applied for the green card for the United States to come back to the United States to work. It took him 7 years to get that green card. He finally got it. So he's now a green card holder. So he's going to be moving to United States soon with his family. But see, those people who wait in line takes 7 years, and right. You can just cross the border as an invader. And it just, that makes my skin crawl whenever I talk about it.
I'm not in favor of illegal immigrations either. And I think you didn't call it immigration, you call it invasion.
Yes, I do call it, because they're not immigrant. They are I can't even tell you.
Really, and I've said this before, and it doesn't matter to me who the president is, whether I like him or hate him, Republican or Democrat. Anybody who just who opens the borders to this country should be impeached and kicked out of office.
Completely. If there's a no border, what is that? That's not a country. If there is a no border control whatsoever, anybody can just come and go as they please. That is not a country. So the moment I think somebody is having open border policy, that is against United States rule, and that should be, as you said, the basis for impeachment.
Yeah, it's violating our sovereignty, and that's worse than the Constitution. If you took an oath to uphold the Constitution, you're not upholding the Constitution by letting the borders stay.
That's right.
And I don't understand why more people aren't making that point though.
I don't know. I feel as though I got the Constitution as somebody who gave me as a present, and I hold it dearly. It literally says you are going to protect the sovereignty of the United States, and the president is sworn in to say, "I'm going to protect the Constitution." And why is it not happening? And why are we okay with this? I feel like sometimes I woke up in just kind of a nightmare and I can't get out.
Well, yeah, and I think I read somewhere that only 3% of America's high school students could pass the basic immigration test.
Yes.
And then they made the other point, which I think these people grow up to vote. And I, the issue, one of the major issues is that most Americans don't know what's in the Constitution.
That's
And
exactly right.
right, they don't know what's in the Constitution. They don't know and people get on me for talking so absolute sometimes. I tell people, you aren't gonna be concerned about losing a right that you know you don't have. And so it's a lot of things going on now that people are getting away with simply because we just don't know any better. And that's one of the areas. So let's talk about your experience growing up in South Korea. Now, when they divided the South and North with the 38th parallel in 53, were you even born? You weren't even born then,
No,
right?
I was not born. I was born in
Yeah, I mean, so how much time what experience do you have with the South Korean economy vis-a-vis the North Korean economy? And I'm assuming you go back there, and I know you got a business there, or you majored in economics, so it's pretty easy for you to figure it out. So tell us about the South Korean economy versus North Korea, and how did you get your familiarity, your adult familiarity with South Korea versus North
Sure.
Korea?
I was born in 1973, and a lot of people don't know this, but when we were split in 1953, it was actually North Korea who had a higher GDP than South Korea. So North Korea was actually, I mean, obviously tomato, both were very poor countries, but North Korea at least was about $850 as per capita, whereas South Korea was only about $500. So and up until about 1970, close to 1980 or so, our economy size were kind of similar size of North Korea and South Korea. So growing up in South Korea, there was a lot of competition between North Korea and South Korea. And that was very much clear on TVs and programs and so forth. Because the war we didn't finish the war, we paused. The war hasn't resolved. It has basically we're in pause stage. Because of that, there's always a fear of the war could happen anytime. And there's a lot of spies coming from North Korea, and South Korea obviously would probably send spies as well. And month of June used to be called month of, like here, Black History Month or Asian History Month. Month of June in Korea was anti-communist month. That's how we grew up. In the month of June, we would do posters in school from first grade all the way, basically how to beat communism and how to beat North Korea. And we were grown up in a lot of propaganda word. So I clearly remember how I was propagandized by South Korean government about North Korea. So that's how I grew up. But then we were actually attacked a couple of times of my time. And in 1988, when the Seoul Olympic was happening, when we were about to get announced to become a host of the Seoul Olympic, North Korea actually tried to terrorize. They did some bombing of South Korea, trying to scare any of the people to come to Korea for Olympics and so forth. But that was a really big pride moment for South Korea to be able to host Olympics and so forth. And when I was going to school in elementary school, I remember vividly that a lot of students didn't have money or anything. We were a very poor country. I happened to be born in a pretty wealthy family, so I had a TV, I had a phone, we had a refrigerator, but a lot of my friends did not have any of those. Having an ice cream in your refrigerator was very much of a luxury that you couldn't fathom in a lot of the different families. So the miracle of a South Korean's economy growth, I literally lived through it. And when we were working so hard, our GDP used to be about $1,000 and so forth for up until 1980 or so, and then we grew so fast. And now our GDP per capita is close to 35,000, 36,000. But that was very much a rapid growth. And I still remember when I was going to school in the United States and as a high school, which was a very rare thing to do in 1990, my dad used give me a lecture about how US dollar was so hard earned by Korean workers who are working 20 hours in a factory in a Nike, making sneakers and so forth. These women and these men worked so hard, Jinny, to get that US dollar, and you are spending that US dollar to go to United States to study. So you have to understand what kind of burden you are putting to your country, South Korea. So you have to do really well, and you have to do something really remarkable when you grow up, because you actually wasted their resources. And that was my father's lecture coming back. But yes, so Korea was a very poor country throughout my life. And we have now this miracle of an economy, which is so blessing for my country. And everybody is living much better life than used to be. But I feel really horrific sadness when I think about North Korea, because South Korea and North Korea is a very, very small country. South Korea is the size of Indiana, and Seoul, which is the capital of South Korea, which is only an hour away from our border of South and North. So that's where I was born. If I was born 1 hour driving distance of the North, I would have been born in North. It's not like you choose where you want to be born. And those women would have completely different life than I would have. And life expectancy perspective, I live at least 11 years old more than the North Korean women at my age. So that it tells you that how horrific the socialism, and that's what they market as that's why it destroyed socialism, and that became communism, that became totalitarianism and so forth, and dictatorship. But it was always a socialism that they decide to go for, and look what happened to them. And a lot of people in my age and younger people think, well, who cares about North Korea? They're not ours. I don't believe that to be true. We are same people. We are both Korean, and our DNA would tell you that we are 100% Korean. We have our own DNA. And I would love to see us unified one day in a way that they can prosper just like us as well.
Well, it's interesting. Well, a couple of things. Let me deal with a couple of things. I'll come back to the unification. You mentioned music.
Yes.
Does that mean you play an instrument and you're good at music?
Yes, that's what I was specialized in when I was in Seoul, Korea. I also I played piano since I was probably about 5 years old, and went to actually special art school called the Sunha in Korea, which is #1 art school. It's a high academic as well. So I did major in piano as well as contrabass, which is a double bass, which is bigger than cello. So that was where those were my basically what my heart was, and that's what I studied a lot. But I got to a point, the pressure and just army way of making you practice is basically they lock you up in a practice room and they don't open that door for 2 hours. And I hated how you were pressured to just practice, and never about what the music actually means to you or how you express yourself through music. But it was very much memorize and then just practice, practice, practice. And I realized later I didn't want to do music. I wanted to go into more studying area, academic area. That's how I came to United States.
Okay. Do you have a favorite area of music, like classical? And if you do, who's your favorite classical composer?
I do love classical music, but the problem with the classical music is when I listen to it, instead of just enjoying it, I start kind of nitpick it or trying to like dissect it, especially I love orchestra. I love orchestra music because I play the contrabass and piano and so forth, and I love how all different instruments come together and have a different texture, have depth, and it just fascinates me. And that's one of the reasons I was actually at Minnesota Orchestra Gala the other day and listened to their orchestra. It's so great. But it's hard to just relax and listen with orchestra or classical music. So, a lot of people listen to classical music to relax. Myself is opposite. So I actually like to listen to jazz music or soft music when I work. Kind of puts me into much more focus.
Okay. So just help me understand your listening of this classical music. Are you the type that says, she played a B sharp when it should have been a B flat? Is it at that level, or are you? Because that's a lot of talent and skills there to do that.
I do not have absolute hearing, but I do have relative tune. So when I hear it, I can play right away. So that I do have relative tune. I don't have absolute tune, but I can hear pretty well of the tuning perspective. But more of the fact, orchestra music, if I hear it, I think about it as like, oh, they paused over here, or they decided to go a lot more softer and then to crescendo later, or oh, there's a bassoonist coming up. Oh, there is a contrabass coming up. Oh, there's a viola is great. So it's trying to like analyzing it and in a way that it was, of course, is much more enjoyable, but rather than I can focus on work and listening to classical, that I cannot do. Because when I listen to classical music, I like to close my eyes and kind of really put it loud so I can hear every different instrument, and that is so meaningful to me. That's why.
Well, one last thing. When the last time you played the piano or anything? When the last time you done that?
I don't play anymore. I play a little bit here and there, but it is so frustrating not be able to play like I used to play. Now, obviously, of course, you're not going to play as you used to play because I'm not practicing 10 hours a day, obviously. So, of course, that's definitely like athletes and pianos and everything is if you don't practice, you're just going to go backward. And I think that's sometimes very frustrating. But I still am very grateful that I did have that experience because I have such appreciation for music and classical music, especially, and that because of that.
Well, I tell everybody there's different levels to everything. When you get into classical music and pianos and that stuff can be like advanced math.
Yes.
It can be like advanced math. I played the trombone in high school, but that's a whole different level than what you're at right now. So I really just like that. Another thing you mentioned, though, which I want a clarification of, is you mentioned the propaganda that was going on in South Korea. And I'm trying to wrap my head around what type of propaganda it was. Maybe can you share a little bit of that with our audience, the propaganda and the purpose of the propaganda?
Which is a kind of sad history of our country, I'm sure. But the problem is propaganda happened both in South and North. And in South, actually, we kind of dropped it. And then North Korea just kind of put accelerator on it and then put steroid on it. But because we were facing each other and we didn't know when the war was going to happen, it was very important for the South Korean government to make every human being in South Korea as patriotic as possible and kind of train them to think North Korea is our enemy and how to kind of view them as an enemy. And it's awful, but when I think about it, those books that they showed us or the comics or any drawings that they showed us, they were drawn as monsters. It wasn't a human being that was in North Korea. So that's kind of a propaganda I'm talking about. And also they used to do a lot of scare tactic for us. So that's sort of a way.
Okay. So you come to America, you're working. What was your first job, by the way? Well, no, let me go back to one other thing you mentioned. This is another thing I'm curious about. I know like the Americans, well, let me start off here. Anytime a homogeneous population is divided, there are still biological connections of people from each side. And I just remember the Civil War, you had families on different sides. I remember when the Berlin Wall went up in Germany. Some of the family members was East Germany, some was West Germany. So I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that there are some people in South Korea with relatives and family close in North Korea.
That is exactly true. And that's one of the things I remember watching and crying. I mean, the whole country cried, to be clear. Mm-hmm. So when they're separated, and after the war, I still remember in the first TV shows, one of the things that they said was looking for the lost ones, because there was no, when they split, it split overnight. It wasn't like, hey, we are going to close the border, so move to whichever country you want. That's not how it happened. It split one day. So therefore, when I was young, I still remember the TV shows that actually was kind of nonstop. People were coming to the TV station and holding up pictures or anything. I'm looking for my husband, looking for my father, because they didn't know where this person was. If you can remember, there was no phones at the time. There was not really addresses or any, because if you are kind of lost in the shuffle, you have no idea where to even contact your relative to figure out where the person is. So there was a show about looking for the lost relatives, and they were showing the pictures, and they were looking for, pleading to somebody, please call me, somebody please contact me. And because there's no way of contacting, actually TV stations were doing the connecting of the people of the whole South Korea. So first people in South Korea try to figure who is in South Korea. That was the first stage. So once we figured it out, who is everywhere in South Korea, then it was trying to figure out, okay, whoever is in North and South, trying to unify them for just even for a few days and so forth. So we plead to North Korea to unite those people. And they used to do that actually quite more often when we were kind of similar stage of the economic perspective, because North Korea was a similar economy as a South Korea. So they didn't really have a lot to hide for in that perspective. So I remember they were doing annually kind of 30 families or 50 families or 70 families, and they will broadcast those things in TV, and it's heartbreaking. And a lot of times, sometimes it could be husband and wife, and they remarried on one side, but one side did not remarry and just waited there for that person, and they're finally uniting them, father, son, and grandfather, and so forth. But more and more South Korea became richer. North Korea decided that they can use this as a leverage. So they started actually asking a lot of money, a lot of assistance from South Korea to make this happen. Of course, we would have complied. But they will only put the North Korean people to come to those greetings and the unification times only if they were very loyal to the party. If they're going to say anything bad about North Korea, of course, they are not going to be able to come. There's a lot of selection processes. And sometimes I remember still, I think they did a couple of times actually. It was supposed to happen in 3 days. So the whole South Korea is just super excited, and they're celebrating decorating the whole place. And every family member is like talking about how I'm going to be so happy to see this family member. And somebody will say, okay, I remember my daddy used to love this particular dish. I made it, I brought it. I can't wait for him to try it. And they cancel it the night before. It is the thing that they used to do with the South Koreans. It just broke everybody's heart. And of course, everybody would cry. This is a horrific things that they were doing. And we haven't done any of those families gatherings anymore, because North Korea refused to do that anymore because their situation is pretty bad right now. So that hasn't happened for years at this point. But the sad part is because, as you said, we've been separated for 70 years, Lacy, right? So therefore, those people who are separated, they are dying away. The people who actually have a relatives are passing away. And a lot of people say that, please scatter my ashes to North so that I can at least to go and see them. And those are very much of a common day stories in South Korea. Because of that, even though I never been to North Korea, I'm still South Korea citizen. The fact that we see these things all the time is why I can talk about North Korea and South Korea in a way that really is from my heart, because we still live through it.
Right. So now, you mentioned a couple of, as far as you mentioned, originally North Korea per capita income was higher than South Korea.
Correct.
And somewhere down the line that changed. Well, a couple of things. Well, first of all, Kia, the car manufacturer, isn't that a South Korean company?
Yes, Kia is a South Korean company. Hyundai is also a South Korean company.
Hyundai. Yep.
Genesis is also a South Korean company.
Which one is it?
Genesis.
Genesis. Oh yeah, Genesis. Yeah. Okay. Good. What I want to get to is that, well, a couple of things. Was there a distinct plan developed to grow the economy of South Korea? And then what were the industries that growth was based? How do you explain that growth? So was there a plan and explanation for the growth?
Yes, our president, one of the president, Park Chung-hee, is the one that actually grew our economy as much as possible. As you said, number one was education. They made education up until 12th grade as a free education provided a country. So that was very important to educate our young kids. So the education was our ground, our foundation. And the other factor was, some countries, the U.S. is very blessed that have a lot of commodities and materials that you can actually dig up from the land. South Korea just happened that we have zero things, literally zero things. North Korea has coal, at least. So at least they have coal as a commodity that comes out of our land. South Korea, we don't have anything. All we have is a human capital. That's what we have. Mm-hmm. So because of that, first thing, what we did was manufacturing businesses, because we had a lot of people who is willing to work really hard at a really low cost. South Korea grew our business because through the manufacturing business. That was the first kind of a wave of the things that we're able to do. A lot of U.S. companies came to Korea, built the factory, so that they can tap into the cheap labor that was also the government did everything that can invite the businesses. Once we got through the manufacturing businesses, we start looking into more high value industry, which are the electronics and car businesses. And our biggest importer is actually chips. So those are circuit boards. Those are our nationally focused, actually, country spent a lot of money into that industry, thinking that this industry is going to be a great industry for us to focus on, and that paid off. As you know, the South Korea and Taiwan are the biggest circuit board and chip manufacturing countries in the whole world, and because of that, we're able to prosper in a country. But it's all.
I'm gonna try to wrap us up here on a couple of controversial type things. But before we go there, they recently passed the CHIP Act here.
Yes.
In America. Is there any, it makes sense. We want to bring some of that chip manufacturing because they're strategic type of resources for our country. Is there any concern in South Korea that that industry is going to become stagnant or even reduce the size of that industry in South Korea as a result of this CHIPS Act?
We don't. It's thinking of as a pie, right? Are we talking about which is bigger slice of the pie we're going to try to get? But the problem is the pie is growing the faster than any other thing. Because the pie itself is growing, we're not worried about it. But we are trying to make sure that we have the upper hand and the most high technology and so forth. And Samsung actually is one of the biggest chip producer and one of the big recipients of that CHIPS Act from the United States. And they are building a huge factory in the United States. And it will be good for the United States as well as good for Samsung, which is good for our country.
And I encourage people out here to subscribe to our podcast and comment. And I'm getting ready to get into areas where we might get a few comments here. A couple things. What would you say to Black Americans who think that affirmative action is the right and proper thing to do? Well, I'll just leave it kind of open like that, because a lot of my friends, they don't want to give that up. In fact, they don't like people who talk about giving it up. Help me out of here a little bit. Give me something I can add to the arguments I've been making against affirmative action and why we should be discriminating against people and why we don't need it. What would you say to my African American friends out there who say, "Hey, look, what are you talking about? No affirmative action. We need it." What would you say to them?
Don't let them tell you are less good than they are. The affirmative action basically means they don't think you are capable of doing the same level as other people. They are patronizing you. They are reducing you. You do not want to be in that situation of a recipient, even if you get something out of it in the short term. In a long term, you are giving up your self-worth for the short-term gain. I will tell you not to do it. Look at what you have done in athletes, and don't look at just a short history of the United States. Look at the history of a world history. Look at what Africa used to be. Look at the history of what your ancestors were able to do in Africa. It was a prosperous, the whole lot of civilization was started there. Look at that. Think about how proud that you should be of your ancestors. Don't reduce your long history of a pride of Africa to just a couple hundred years of United States of slavery. Put that in perspective of the thousands of years And don't let anyone tell you you're not good enough. That will be the worst thing you can do to yourself and your kids.
That was pretty good, actually. I shouldn't act surprised by it because that's my thing too. Remember your history, who we are.
Exactly.
We can do anything.
Exactly.
Yeah, we can do anything. Don't let these people. But the other part is, and I could get on that for a while. I was in education for a little bit, started up a charter school, did a lot of research. We're in trouble. But one of my points is, and then one of the problems I had with our Secretary of Education, if you think about it, it's really the reason you need affirmative action for college because you're not doing your job in the K through 12.
Correct. Yeah. And they are trying to come up with an affirmative action because they have not done their job of educating kids correctly.
Right.
They're trying to cover up their own mistakes. It's not about your kids, and they're just using their kids, using African American kids as a pawn, and don't fall for that. And you should hold the teachers accountable. That's what they should do.
But another thing I'm gonna say is a lot of the stuff I just think of as we're going along here. The other, what I say to a black high school student, don't forget HBCUs. In fact, it might be better for you to go to an HBCU than to go to a place where they got some numbers and you're just a number and you're trying to fix some goals and stuff like that. In fact, there's data out there that show that black students that go to HBCUs perform better and do better anyway. So that's the other thing I would add to that. Okay, a couple of other quick things here. I'm gonna try to help get you in trouble on, I guess. So let's talk about the socialism versus the capitalism. What would you say because there's a lot of young people out there, and
yeah.
And I say this because I was young at one time. I studied communism, socialism. I studied every kind of ism there is out there. But I think I'm pretty good at thinking things through and logic and stuff and understanding what I'm reading. And so I agree with you. Capitalism is the best system. It's not perfect. To me, I tell them it's kind of like the jury system. Boy, it scares me to death a lot of time, but I can't think of anything better. And it's like, I think Winston Churchill, I think he said capitalism is the worst type of system. Only problem is you can't find anything better, kind of like the same type of thing. So tell our American audience out there that based on your experience in dealing with both close and up personal, with both capitalism as in South Korea, socialism, which leads to a lot of other bad isms and things that we're talking about in North Korea. Give our audience a sense of your views on that and why, especially keeping in mind a lot of our young people that's been college educated. It's scary though. It really is. I don't know how they get there, but they're really into socialism. They think that's the answer, etc. What would you say to them, Jinny?
Yes, I think socialism always has been and is marketed as a utopia, right? You get everything for free. You get free education, you get free housing, you get free healthcare, you get free electricity, and everything will be shared equally. And everybody will work their jobs, and the fruits of the labors will be shared equally. Sounds freaking nice, right? This is utopia. And a lot of people who are, especially young people, thinking, well, I don't have anything to give, so therefore I have nothing to lose, so let's go to socialism. The thing they're forgetting is when you're going to socialism, not just that you have to give up all of your assets and all of your belongings to the government because there's no private property, government has to take it all. But it's not only material things. Whatever is in your mind, whatever you have the skills, that also belongs to the government. And they think, I don't have anything to give. Well, guess what? They likely walk up in some out of the comfort bed somewhere, roof over their heads. They have a clothing on their back. They have a lot of these electronics that they have. None of them now belongs to you. So that's number one. So even if you don't have anything, you have a lot to lose. And number two, whatever it's in your mind, whatever it's in your skills that you have, no longer you have freedom to choose the job that you want to. The government is going to assign you a job, regardless of what your specialty or skill set is. They're going to try to align, but that's not necessarily not up to you. And even if you don't have any of those, guess what? You have able body, meaning they're going to put you into physical labor and you don't get to say no. So I think in America, somehow they think it's materialistic is the only thing that gets socially divided That's not true. Your mind, your body no longer becomes you. And I think they completely forget about that part. And top of that, in order to take all these assets and belongings from people and make sure they don't fight back to you, that's where the socialism turn before they even start. That's where the violence come in. That's when the governments will do the most cruel things to their citizens to take their assets and all of their property belongings and not let you question them. And one of the way them to do control your people is to through a public fear. And in order to create this fear, they do the public execution, whether it's hanging or shooting people in public and making them to see. That's a perfect and the greatest way of controlling your people. Because of these reasons of the socialism, in order to even get to it, even if to start it, nobody ever get to the socialism. They take a turn to the other directions. And that's why we have these communism, totalitarianism, or Marxism, and Leninism, and fascism, and so forth. But all of these people chose socialism at first step is one thing that everybody forgets it. They talk about the end result and saying, oh, North Korea is not a socialist country. They're a totalitarian country. Guess what? They didn't go for that. They went to socialism, and that's where they ended up. And that's why nobody ever lived in socialist countries. So why even thinking about trying in the United States? As you said, that's the definition of insanity.
It is. Well, I tell a lot of people, the more I travel outside the U.S., the more I appreciate it.
And that's one of the things I would love to do is basically all these kids in the United States, I think they should get out of the United States, go any country for just a whole month, backpack through the Europe, backpack through the Asia, anywhere country, then you will appreciate the value of the United States.
Yeah, my one of my sons got indoctrinated to this stuff. I got an open offer to him. Whatever country you want to move to, I'll pay the move for you to go and live there.
Yes.
I think it's worth you learning the lesson.
100%.
Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to get into, and I think, sometimes I get into these conversations, you start saying things that interest me. One thing I wanted to get into is the whole investment area, the private equity. Is this, now I'm assuming this is for a company based in San Francisco. Is that correct? I don't know. So they do a lot of business with Silicon Valley. Are we talking tech companies, private equity investment in tech company, or different kinds of companies? Well, let me cut to this. Good talking. Why don't you explain to me exactly what you do in the private equity area?
I used to work at TPG. TPG is more of a private equity firm. Yes, they do invest into technology companies, but also other industry of the companies. So one of the things that they will, what private equity basically means, you're trying to buy a company that is low, it's valued lower than what you would have thought. And you think there are things you can do to this company, whether it is improving their technology, improving their geography standards, whatever that is that you can add to the strategic value to the company and increase the value. They buy the company, and they do a lot of things to make the company improved, and then they sell off, or they kind of get that merged into another company through M&As and so forth. That's what private equity is. So my background on that private equity side was more mid-size of the companies that were trying to go into industrial side of the industry side of it. But prior to that, I am more of a hedge fund person.
Hedge fund. Okay, then we'll talk about a little bit.
Yeah, I come from Bridgewater Associates, which was a global macro hedge fund.
Yeah, but quickly before we leave private equity, based on what you just said, that almost sounds like you're leveraged buyout sometimes. Sometimes include leveraged buyout. And a lot of those guys don't have good a good brand, these leveraged buyouts. That's
very true. I'm not gonna lie.
Are they the kind, and this is not judgmental, because some of them see value in breaking the company up and laying people off. And not that I have a problem with that, because I think at the end of the day, I'd rather trust economic principle and math and stuff like that, and the principle of capitalism, than someone coming in and saving somebody. But is that the type of, will some of your clients fall into that category?
Yeah, so I like to a little bit. That's image that's out there. So yes, I did used to do leverage buyout when I was at UBS as well. So leverage buyout basically means one company wants to buy another company. They don't have a lot of money to buy them. So therefore, they are going to borrow a lot of money. So it's leverage basically you're borrowing a lot of money through bonds or through equities or whatever, however you can source the money to buy the company.
Right.
Here's the thing. Leverage buyout means it is very risky because you're borrowing a lot of money to do this thing, to this merging the two companies or buying up the companies. So you're taking a lot of risk. So therefore, going to be a lot of a reward if it works out. Not always works out. So in capitalistic society, it makes sense, right? If you're putting more risk, you're going to get rewarded more. But also that means you're taking a risk that it's not going to go well as well. So because of that, private equities and so forth, at the same time, same thing for the venture capitalists in a way is you have to invest into at least 20 companies or 30 companies or 40 companies, whatever the case is, because not all of them is going to be a winner. You are going to venture capital is 1 in 20, maybe a workout, 1 in 100 if you're early investors. It's kind of spaghetti on the wall. You're kind of throwing everything on it to see one of them stick. That's more early venture capitalist side of the businesses, whereas the private equity is a lot more later in the stage. So if you're investing into maybe a $200 million company, you're trying to grow that business to be $1 billion company. So when you're thinking about $200 million company became $1 billion worth company, means they grew business a lot, meaning they hired a lot of people. So instead of trying to look at it to say, hey, they're just getting a lot of money, but they risked a lot. And in order for them to get paid out, it has to grow, meaning you have to hire a lot of people, create a lot of different jobs. So that's one of the reasons I love capitalistic society, because you're not thinking about how to get a little bit more in that fixed pie. You're focusing on growing the pie itself. So everybody gets to have more.
And now your current position is not private equity, right? What are you doing currently?
Correct. Right now, I am a CEO for a fundraising company in California. What we do is we raise fund for private equity fund or a hedge fund or private companies wants to start up a new fund or a new company. They're raising fund. We help them raise a fund. And my business in South Korea is asset management business, meaning we pull our clients' money that they trust us with their investment, and we invest accordingly into U.S. market.
So I'm going to try to wrap it up here. I know you got to go out and eat dinner. I'm not like your dad saying you got to be in there cooking it. I don't have that kind of perspective. But by the way, I would like to educate my audience on a lot of economics that's going on in this country. So I'd like to have you back and just talk the economic side, if you don't.
I'd love to.
Yeah, if that's okay, because you're probably like me, and maybe you're not, because you're more detailed and more knowledgeable in this field than I am. But when I start seeing things like our debt, our national debt, and just
it's a big problem.
Yeah, and explore things like that. We'll talk. I mean, if you notice, politicians hardly ever talk money. Well, they hardly ever talk issues anyway.
Very true. They talk about feelings.
Yeah, the feelings. That's a saying that says, "Show me a politician who's talking about issues, and I'll show you a loser."
Yeah, that's exactly.
And they're right. People don't care about no issue. They care about they want you to make them like you.
Yes.
Like equals trust equals vote.
That is such a bad one. You got to look at their track record. What have they done? We're hiring somebody for a very important job. You would want to look at their track record and what they have done. Just like when I hire hundreds of people in my jobs, you have to look at their resumes. You look at them, you probe them about what they did, how accurate this resume is, and trying to get at what kind of personality that they have and what kind of capabilities that they have for this big job that we have. And right now, it's all about feelings and whether you want to have a beer with that person or not beer with that person. Who cares?
Whether they got a nice looking picture of their daughter or their dog is nice. It just, and because it's somewhat, you learn not to do it though, because I try to talk policies and results.
Exactly.
And guess what? No one, all I know, is interested in policy and results. They keep coming back to the same thing. And my pet peeve, and I'll repeat this too, and I might get some comments on it, is that I think they use race and racism to get us emotional and keep voting for the same party,
Right.
Democrats every time. And I see what they're doing, and they know it, but they know how people's brains work. They've done some studies on our brains and stuff, and they know how our brains work. And we think we're logical, but they know we're not. And so I don't know how we're going to solve that issue. So this has been very, very enjoyable conversation here. I'm going to work with you to set up a second interview, and we're going to focus on economics and economic principles, some of the challenges, economic futures. We don't just wake up one day and we're in this position. And I might even want to pick your brains on central banks and stuff that our framers of the Constitution talked about, and Federal Reserve and all that stuff, because a lot of that has to do with the direction of our country. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they're basically manipulating the voters to not care about things they should care about. And they're manipulating voters to care about things that they should probably care about. You know, they got our priorities all screwed up. And a lot of it is related to economics. And we're going to talk about it maybe from a global standpoint. We know that the dollar is the currency that most of the rest of the world currency is based on. I have an understanding that the dollar plays a very strategic role in our international policies and how we control countries and how we control the world. I know there's some things, especially when they do the sanctions, and we're going to relate it to what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, that whole war. We're going to talk about probably why we're sending, every time we look up, some president is sending hundreds of billions of dollars to overseas to fight some war. And just a quick warning, we might even get into the role of war and the economics of war. So, and we're going to get into some very, very, I think, interesting conversation for our audience. And hopefully I'll learn something, by the way.
Hopefully I can provide.
Yeah, you will. Like the Korean War was over in 1953. Jinny, this has been very, very good conversation. I know your dad is looking down, very proud of how it goes, even though she didn't quite turn out to meet my stereotype of how she should be. But I'm glad to see you're independent and welcome to America. And I know you got dual citizenship, I think.
I actually am still South Korean citizen. South Korea does not allow dual citizenship. So that's why I'm still South Korean citizen. I know I pay tax here, not in South Korea. I lived here longer than South Korea, but country is not what your passport says who you are, right? I think it's a lot more than that. So in a way, I still think about what my dad said, you are going to America with a hard US dollar earned by these factory workers working 20 hours a day for $3 an hour. And I don't know. I feel like I still owed a lot to my country, but we'll see what happens in the future. Never says never.
You'll see how my mind works eventually too, because you just mentioned the cheap labor over there again. By the way, and I'm gonna end with this curiosity. How much does Nike? What's the hourly rate for Nike workers over there in South Korea? I'm just curious.
They're no longer in South Korea. They used to be.
They're in China now, right?
I think it used to be in China. I think they even moved.
Vietnam.
That's where they are now.
Yeah, they're in Vietnam.
They literally go for the cheap and then another cheap. Because the moment their labor cost goes up, they move their factory to the cheaper labor.
And if people found how cheap it is to make these iPhones, we might stop buying them and what they're paying the people over there. So we might get into that a little bit too. So Jinny, this has been a very good first interview. Like I said, we're going to follow up and focus a little bit more on economics, because we really need to understand that. And we're going to get there. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you today.
Yeah, same here. So we'll talk again. I'll text you. I'll send you an email, and we'll arrange a second interview, and we'll get into those areas. So
we'll do.
Glad talking to you. Have a great dinner. Tell your husband hi for me. And you got me some ideas for my next man's cave here. So thank you for that. All right. Have a great evening, Jinny.
You too. Great talking to
Okay.
you today. Bye,
All right.
Lacy.
Thank you. All right. So Jinny Choi, everybody, very successful lady of achievement, immigrant that came here from South Korea. And she is like me. We just believe in the capitalistic system. We believe in the competition. We are not a socialist. I don't even like parity in the NFL. I liked it when it was free, and if you drafted somebody, you kept them. I don't like free agency either, though. But that's just me. I'm old school. Anyway, that's enough. Go out and on my YouTube channel, LacyJohnson.com. Like the podcast, subscribe, comment. Let's look at my online store and buy some merchandise and just communicate. Let's just keep talking, especially in the comment field. If you think I don't know what I'm talking about, I want to hear it in no uncertain term. And you think whatever you think, let me know. And I really like people who disagree or have a different perspective. Good night, Lacy Johnson Podcast. See you next week.